Right. Okay, I will.
Cool. All right. Well, welcome to the session today, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about dataing and a conference that I went to. Why is this not moving on? So in the end of June, I was in Brisbane, well, actually out of Brisbane in the Glass House Mountains, and I was at the SRTL conference, and it's a 1-week all-in conference. So you're involved in the topic of the conference for the whole week, and you have people present, and then at the end you get you have some discussants, and I was a discussant. And the focus of the conference was data and dataing. And so I just want to share this initial bit as my sort of reflection from the conference, and then I'm going to go a little bit deeper into my thoughts on it. So one of the terms that came, or two terms, was this idea of far and near data. And so far data is data that somebody else has collected, so it's a secondary or existing data set. And some of the ideas from the conference that came up around secondary data sets and dataing with these. So things about, so is messy data more likely to get us dataing? If we're problematizing the data, is this dataing? We're storytelling and we're looking for opportunities for dataing in the story. Is that, can we find data and do some dataing in the story? When we're interrogating the variables, is this all part of dataing? Do consumers do dataing? So if we're going online and looking at information online and we're trying to maybe choose a product or something, are we dataing? When we're filtering or selecting data, are we doing some dataing? Does imagining the data that could have created the graph that we're looking at mean we're dataing? So these are just things to think about. Is understanding the context part of dataing? So understanding where the data came from, who collected it, etc. How does multivariate thinking come into dataing? And when we create new variables or use proxy variables, are we dataing? So these are just thoughts. This is not anything necessarily yes or no, it's just some things to think about. So that's existing data sets that other people have created. And then there was a lot of ideas that came up under what we might call near data or primary data collection. So it's near data because we've been involved in the data collection process ourselves. So is using real investigations dataing? If we're involved in the data collection, are we dataing more than if we're not involved? Is encoding our collected data to make a graph dataing? How does ethics fit into this and things around misinformation and disinformation? Is that all part of dataing as well? When we define the variables, is that also dataing? Is understanding the context part of dataing? So this has come up again, both in the near and far data. Do producers do dataing? So when we're creating our own data, are we dataing? And looking forward to experiences that inform new cycles. How might we deal with this context? Is this dataing? So those are sort of the ideas that came up throughout the week from the presentations. But what I want to look at now is where I sort of sat in terms of my thinking about data and dataing. And one of the things I sort of thought was, well, you know, to get a sample, we do sampling. So maybe to get data, we do dataing. And so for me, I've sort of been thinking that this idea of dataing is it's the stuff that we do to get data to analyze. So it's all of the stuff that happens in the initial stages of the PPDAC cycle. So it's our problem, it's our plan, and it's our stuff to do with data. So this was sort of my brain dump. And then the analysis and the conclusion is the stuff we do post the data. So let's have a little look about at this. So what's involved in getting data? So I'm going to get you to write your idea in the chat, but don't post it. All right, so just write it in the chat. So go into the chat and just start writing what you think is involved in getting the data, but don't post it yet. Okay, and now if everyone posts together, we then get to share our ideas and we're not so influenced by others' thoughts. Now I've just realized that I have got to open the chat. Okay, so if you can post your ideas about what you think is involved in getting the data. Okay, so we've got one idea, coming up with a good investigative question as part of getting the data. What other ideas do we have? Having an idea about what you're investigating. Okay. All right, so let's move on. So I just want to, if we're thinking about the stuff that comes at the front, one of the big things that we're going to look at in a minute, and this is just sort of giving you a little bit of new info. I'm sorry, I've just got I've got all these screens up. I just need to get my links. I'm going to drop a link into the chat, and that will take you to the data detective posters yourself. So if you can just go and have a look at them, and why have I brought that up? Let's just have a look. So if we go out of here for a minute. No, we don't want to see that. Let's get our data detective posters up. So data detective posters, they tell us about the PPDAC cycle. So the bits we're interested in is problem plan data. But I just wanted to share this with you because you may not know that the data detective poster is available in Te Reo Māori, Cook Island Māori, Tongan, Samoan, and Fijian. So that's just a little share for now, but we're going to come back to poster here. Okay, so data detective posters. So if we think about primary data, what things might we be doing if we're dataing? And so we've already talked in the chat a little bit about the problem. So, but we also need to think about who might want to use the data. So what's the purpose of our data collection? Why are we doing the investigation? Sometimes even part of that is thinking about from a teacher perspective, and in particular, is there an instructional purpose as well that we're thinking about? We also need to think about what is our investigative question and what do we think we'll see in the data. So one of the things we do when we pose an investigative question is we also think about what we think the data will show. It also involves planning. So are we going to do an observational study or use an experiment? And experiments really only come in from about the year 9, 10 level and onwards. We think about ethics. So if we're collecting data and we are collecting it from students in our class or from other people, we're thinking about ethical considerations of privacy. Who are we going to collect the data from? Will we collect it from our whole class? Will we collect it from other classes? Are we going to need to take a sample? And what and how are we going to measure? So we need to think about what our survey or data collection questions are and thinking about defining our variables. All of these are elements of what we might need to do in dataing. And even when we collect our data, we get into that data collection, we've still got to think about managing and potentially cleaning our data. And so just thinking about near data or primary data that we collect, we really got this focus on those first 3 stages of the PPDAC cycle. So investigative questions and investigative situations. And so in New Zealand at the school level, we focus on these 4 in particular. And there's just a little bit of a reminder there about summary. So that's when we have one variable that we're describing for a group or a population. Comparison, we're comparing a numerical variable across 2 or more groups. When we're doing relationships, investigations or situations, we're looking at either paired numerical or paired categorical variables, and time series is when we look at a numerical variable over time. I just made up a couple of questions for some of them there to give an example. I couldn't think of a good one for our webinar group, so that's why there isn't one for time series. Now, there's a lot more detail about investigative questions in particular on pages 36 to 54 in the Statistical Investigations book. Part of what we do in dataing is thinking about planning. And so I did some work with Chris Wild to develop this planning tool. And again, there's more detail on that in page 78 and throughout the plan chapter. But when we're planning for data collection, there's a lot we need to think about. And I've already mentioned these, but how are we going to collect the data? So what's the method we're going to use? Will we collect primary data, or will we look at data that already exists? Who are we going to measure? Are we going to measure people or objects? We might even be looking at non-physical entities. Then what are we going to measure? So say I want to measure, how happy people are. I have to think about defining what happy is, and then I have to think about how I might measure that. Right. So those are the things that we're thinking about with planning. And I mentioned ethics, and I'm going to look at a couple of things here. So ethics is really the idea of doing good and doing no harm. And the Royal Society used to do the student projects, and they no longer have that available, but we've been able to get that information on Census at School, which I put the link there. And if you search it, you'll find, but it's also in the book. But the key thing around ethics is making sure we've got informed and voluntary consent, for example, from our participants, minimizing the risk of harm, making sure that people can withdraw at any time without having to give a reason, respecting and protecting people's privacy and confidentiality, avoiding unnecessary deception, and being socially and culturally sensitive to participants' cultural and religious perspectives. Now, these are things that I think as teachers we've always intuitively thought about, but I think we need to be really thinking up front about what that means when we do stuff in our class. And we need to be getting our students to think about what it means. In Census at School, they've done a lot of work in the background, really just thinking about what this means. And so in the past, we would have given back teachers the entire data set. I guess we assumed that teachers would be very careful about how they handled it. But now we've kind of taken that element of chance out of it, and we give back the data in many different ways. But for your class data, you don't get all of the data anymore as once upon a time you would. And so any of the questions that are marked private on the questionnaire go only into the big database. They don't actually go back with the class data. And in the class, even with the class data, you get some of it as a group. So the questions around the measurements mostly, but the rest of the questions, often opinion ones and things like that, you only get those back as a single data set. So you can explore the data for the class, but you have no idea which student and the other data that connects up to. So thinking about secondary data, so I've sort of flipped a little bit now and gone from primary data to thinking about secondary data. What happens in this situation here is that we may not follow the PPDAC cycle. So more often than not, we're thinking about data, secondary data. We look at how it was collected and then we pose a problem. But sometimes we might start with thinking about a problem, decide to get secondary data, and then we have to find the data, and then we have to interrogate it before we can do an analysis. And sometimes we have a big picture idea about what we might want to do. We go and get we decide we're going to get secondary data, we get the secondary data, we interrogate it, and then we pose our investigative questions. So there's many ways we can look at secondary data. And so we don't always look at the data PPDAC cycle as a cycle that goes around in that order. And for the dataing stuff, this is a bit that I'm thinking about as the dataing, the bits that we do up to, but not including the analysis and conclusion. So let's have a think about what that thing looks like more specifically for secondary data sets or ones that we haven't collected. So things like data dictionaries, finding the metadata or stuff about data provenance is really important. Thinking about the definitions of variables is very important. And for example, the Litter Intelligence website, which is based on New Zealand, is amazing because it has all of these documents here that you can go into, and it tells you information about what their variables mean and how to collect them and how to define them. It's just an amazing resource. And similarly, in Census at School, we have some information in the background that tells us about the variables and why we might be collecting them. So, for example, this is one of the questions that's in the current census. Does pineapple belong on pizza? And within the teacher's guide, which we'll look at a bit more in a moment, it shows us why the question was, why it's there, and some background information about the question. One of the things that we need to do is interrogate the data, and that involves us looking at the original investigator's plan. And this one was actually meant to come up with the very first one, but the things that we need to do is when we're collecting our data, we might need to think about the kinds of data we need, but we need to also think about when we're using secondary data, where did the data come from, who collected it, and things like that. Okay, so and then once we've done all of that stuff, what happens is we then get to the point that we can pose our investigative questions. All right. So I'm going to now look at Census at School and how that helps us with this dataing stuff, if you like. And in the teacher's guide section, which is in the take part, currently we have now the primary and secondary teacher's guides, both of which are in Te Reo Māori. And soon we're going to also have them in Cook Island Māori, in Tongan and Samoan. All right, so that's pretty exciting. But what does it look? Why have I gone there? What does this have to do with dataing? So in the teacher's guide, the first thing we have some background information about the purpose of the question. All right, so here's a question on foot lengths. This is a question we've seen for many years. You may or may not realise that it's moved from just measuring the right foot to now measuring the right foot and the left foot. And it talks a little bit about why we might ask for both foot measurements. And so basically here it tells us that we're able to look at maybe the difference in length between the 2 feet, or to look at the relationship between the feet sizes themselves, or maybe we can look at how foot size and handedness or age or something might be connected. But as well, it gives us a little bit of background about the question as well. And so, for example, it says that, here it says like 80% of Americans have longer left feet than right feet. But actually, when we go into shoe shops, have you ever noticed that they always put out the right foot? I mean, if most people have a longer left foot, why do they put the right foot out? So these are quite interesting things, maybe to kids or not. I find it quite fascinating. I always thought it was just me that had a longer left foot than other people than right foot, but actually we all do, or many of us do. And so that's a bit about the purpose, which is really important, and that background information students need to know. But also we have this lovely bit here where it tells us about measuring. And so in the teacher's guide, it has a measurement station, and it tells us exactly what to do. So that really helps us to get students to understand, one, how we would explain to people how to make measures, but also it gets them to understand how the data was collected. And then also on that how measured card, or how to measure card, are some questions that we can use as a teacher to get students to think about reliability and validity, for example, of the how we make the measure, or to think about what the data might be involved, might show, or who might be interested in the data. So coming back to that purpose. When we use secondary data, one of the things that's really important to do is to interrogate the variables for secondary data. And we're going to move into an activity now where you're going to do that work. And what the thing about these questions is this is what we have for interrogating secondary variables or secondary data sets. But actually, students should be thinking about these things when they're collecting their own data as well. So I want to give you a seed of an idea. So this is where this started. So I did a session with some teachers maybe a couple of months ago, 6 weeks ago, and I met with them again yesterday. And I had given them some data cards. So a friend of mine, Gail Burrell, in the USA, when I was talking to her about data cards one day, she goes, oh, I use the Monopoly cards as data cards. And I thought, that's a great idea. And so I have been collecting old Monopoly games from op shops when I see them. But I thought, well, actually, I'm going to give them both the houses cards, but also the chance and the community chest cards. And so different groups dealt with different things. And it was really interesting when they started sorting those cards out, particularly the chance and the community chest. And I think they decided that one of them was better to get than the other because you got more good things. Anyway, but it was interesting. And then the other thing I did, the data set I had was these cards from, I think Countdown was giving them away. And so there's all this information about these different insects. And they did lots of different sorting with them as well. But what happened was when I saw them yesterday, one of the teachers goes to me, he goes, I've used the Weet-Bix cards with my kids. And I said, yeah, it's cool. And he said, yeah, we got the cards and we organised them and everything. And I said to him, oh, so did they look at whether there was a difference between, things like the height of forwards and the height of backs? And he went, oh, no, we didn't do that. That's another thing we can think about. So we are going to have a little explore. Now, I know that not everyone's into rugby and there will be lots of other data cards, but the purpose of this activity is more to show you the potential about what you can do and how we can do lots of dataing with our students without even, and it's not hard necessarily, and it can be things that are really available. So I just need to give you the link, and to do that, I need to get my link. So I have a set of links. Get away. I have a problem in that my links to share. I'm going to give you this link here in the chat. Here's a chat. Okay, if you go into this link, go into that link. That's where you need to be. And that will take you into a folder. All right, so if you can click on the link and go into the folder. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to explore the Weet-Bix cards. All right, but I'm just going to open up, I just downloaded them and put them in a PDF here for you. You can go and find them there. So before we get too far into the activity, what I want you to do is just have a look at what's there. So we've got age, height, test caps, test points, debut, success rate, and Weet-Bix eaten. All right, so that's the information that's on the cards. But what other information might we be interested in for these cards? So maybe just think about what other variables or other information we could do, and just drop it into the chat. Other variables we could explore or add to the collection we've got there. And I've already suggested possibly one. What I want to do. I'm just going to stop that because I didn't want to do that. Okay. So we might want to look at position played. Okay, what other things could we look at? Okay, potentially ethnicity. Yep. Any other things we could find out about them? We could look at whether they're in the all black or the black ferns. So we could do that. Cool. We could find out the secondary school they attended in the region. Is that the region they are playing or they played? Is that what you mean by region? Okay. All right. So what we've got some ideas of the region they grew up in. Cool. Thank you. We've got some ideas now for some other variables as well. So you can see how already we're moving from just dealing with the data in front of us to kind of thinking about, okay, what else can we do? So we're going to have to do some work to do this. So let's go back to here. So what we're going to do is we're going to open, I've got two, you can see there's two of these. This one here I've left as a blank and you can only view it. So if you want to do this with your students, you can. But if you open the stat attack one, you should be able to edit that if I've got my thing set up well. Okay, so if you can all go into there. And you may want to click on this link in the first one and just get the actual website page opened up. That's reasonably important. Okay, so that's the actual page. It's kind of exciting. They flip around and you'll go down and you'll see we've got some of the black ferns. Okay, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to interrogate the different variables. All right, interrogate the different variables. And so to do that, what we need to do is go through the questions that I suggested before. So age, I put this one here in italics because I don't think that's relevant for this one, for this particular thing, because we don't necessarily know it. But if I was using Census at school, I'd need to know what the data collection question was. So if I go into stat attack and I look at age, what I need to do is scroll up. Oh, and it doesn't tell me anything about age. So I need to have a look at the cards again. And I go, I've got 32, 25, 29. And then I get down to, sorry about the scrolling, I've got these things called legends. And I can see that they're 59. So my best guess is that this is their current age. And I'm going to say in 2023, because this is when these cards were made. All right. What would be the units, if any? Well, the age will be in years. What are the possible outcomes for the variable? Well, I can have a look at the numbers and I can think about what might be the smallest number that we've got. So it looks like, sorry for the scrolling, I think we've got a 21 was the smallest. Okay, we've got a 21 there. And what's the oldest age? Well, if we scroll down, we've got a 59. And then we've got the coaches there. So actually the values in here at the moment could be anywhere from 21 to 66, but we could have younger potentially. And what type of data is it? In this case, it's numerical. So what I want you to do is just jump in to one of the other variables. There's only a few of you, so you should be able to pick one each. So we've got height, test caps, test points, and you can copy the information from the website about how the variable was measured or defined. Okay, and just fill in the bits that are left there. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. Just pick a slide, wheat bix eaten, and then there's some information in red. Go and do one. That'd be great. And I'm going to stop sharing just so you don't have to you got a bit more room to work on it. So hopefully we've had a little bit of a chance to do that. All right, so let's have a look. So here's one on age. So, oh no, that was the one I did. Here we go. Height. So height is at 2023, it's in centimeters. In this instance, the values go from 157 to 202 and it's numerical. Okay. So this, you think, why is this important? Well, actually, the students need to understand the numbers or the information that they get, what it means and how it's collected. All right. So let's carry on. So we can do that unpacking. And if with this one here, so what I did was I dropped in some of the other variables that we talked about. So if we wanted to do position played, we'd need to think about how we might measure that variable. What are the units? Well, there wouldn't be any. What are the possible outcomes? So we could talk about all the different positions in rugby, and it's categorical. Okay, so that's the sort of stuff we can do. So this is really dataing. To me, this is a big chunk of understanding the information we've got. Okay, so now we've understand the variables we're looking at. What we're going to do, hopefully, is we're going to take maybe 2 or 3 cards, and we're going to work together to collect the data. All right, but I thought I'm not going to do anything here, but let's say we were going to collect the data. So we'd want to have the name, and then I can't remember what was it, age, and you should all have access to this one as well. I'm pretty sure I made this an edit document. So we can start to put in the variables that we're going to collect here, and I'll do that across the top. But if you can get into it, that's the StatAttack All Black spreadsheet, All Black, I think I call it All Black and Black Ferns. You can access that, I hope. Yep, people are starting to get in there. And I have made it a edit link, yes. All right, so if you want to pick, say, pick an All Black or a Black Fern, put their name in, and then start to put the data in, and I'm going to write the variables here that we need to do. And we'll just get some data in there. I can't find them now. There we go. Back to test cat. Okay, so just pick one person, put their name in, and put their data in. I do. She's
24, 184, 15.
Okay, so if we can just finish off the ones that we're working on. And so if we decided we were going to do some of these other ones like position played and region they grew up in, we'd have to do a bit of work. And in a class, you could allocate, well, there's 42 cards, so the students could do at least one each, if not two. And so they could start to do some research and find out some of this other data information that they need. All right, but if I can just get that one for Will Jordan in, that would be great. His last number of weeks. Cool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly save this as a CSV. That's not where I want to save it. I'm just going to save on my desktop. Okay, so I'm just going to save that. Okay, and then I'm going to go into Codat. And I am going to hopefully drag and drop that data into here. Okay, and I'm going to save it. I'm going to call this get attack. And then I'm going to get a sharing link and I'm going to share that with you, and you can go and have a look and have a play with the data. But actually, we're finishing up with the dataing, and I'm going to just copy, close, and put that in the chat. And so if you click on this link, you can go and get that data we've just done. All right. But I'm going to leave that with you to play with in your own time, because I'm just aware of time and I need to get moving. So what I was trying to show with that little activity is the things that we can do that in some ways are really simple things that kids may have already been investigating or exploring. And we can just deal with the data that's there if we want, or we can extend it by thinking about other variables that we could get. And with people like the All Blacks or the Black Ferns, potentially quite a bit of this information is also available. So that's what we did. So just coming back to thinking about dataing, there's a human element. It's definitely part of what we do. I think it's about how we get the data. Hopefully, when kids are dataing, they're being creative and curious. We do need to pay attention to this stuff. We do need to think about what is happening in that early stages of the cycle. And there's a lot of richness in what we're doing. And I was hoping that I could capture just some little ideas from you. And so what I would like you to do is I'm going to ask you some questions. If you can just put your ideas in the chat. And then when I say post now, just post them. So just the first one is, what's one thing new that you picked up today? So if you can just type that in the chat. Okay, and if we can post that. Okay, so interrogating questions of secondary data, CODAP, excellent. Okay, so here's your next question. What's one thing you want to share with a colleague? So again, if you can write that in the chat. Okay, and then if you can post, what's one thing you want to share with a colleague? And I think this is my last reflection question. What's one new thing you will do with your students as a result of this session? If you can post that, that would be great. Cool. Okay, so I am just going to just ask a little question at the end, because we're doing some work in the background through the SATZ committee and some conversations I'm having with NZAMP about sort of how do we support teachers. So if I just get out of there, in the folder that we have, there is a doc. I've taken my folder. Here we go. Not that one at all, this one. There's a doc that just says support needed if possible. It's anonymous. I don't need to know, but I do need to know what level you teach. And if there's any support you think you need around stats and probability, and I'm going to stop sharing because we don't need to see that, but I'd really appreciate it if people could drop some ideas in there about support they think they might need. Or maybe not them, who they think their colleagues or people they know might need for stats and probability. That would be awesome. All right, and that's us done pretty much.